Eliza had always been the quietest person in any room she entered. Not because she wanted to be invisible, but because she never knew how to fit in. From the moment she arrived at the new school, she felt like she had stepped into a world where everyone already knew the rules except her. Students greeted each other loudly, laughing, sharing stories, forming small groups that seemed permanent. She watched from the outside, holding her books close to her chest as if they could protect her. Every morning, she sat at the same desk in the last row. She listened carefully when teachers spoke, completed her work on time, and left as soon as the bell rang. She rarely spoke unless someone asked her a direct question. Even then, her answers were quiet and short, as if she was afraid of taking up too much space. What no one knew was that Eliza had a gift she never talked about. When she was at home, alone in her small room, she would sit at her mother's old piano. That piano was the only thing she had left from her mother, who had passed away years earlier. It was scratched, a little out of tune, and missing a polished shine, but to Eliza, it was the most precious thing in her life. When she touched the keys, she felt as if her mother was still there, guiding her hands, comforting her, reminding her that she wasn't completely alone. Eliza had learned to play by listening rather than reading notes. She didn't have formal lessons. Her mother used to hum melodies whenever she cooked, cleaned, or sat beside Eliza on the floor. Those melodies stayed in Eliza's mind, and after her mother was gone, she began placing those memories into the piano. She practiced quietly, not wanting her father or neighbors to hear. Her father worked long hours and barely had time to notice the difference between one day and the next. But Eliza never blamed him. She understood he was doing his best. Still, she never shared her music with him or anyone else. It was the only part of her life that felt truly hers. When the school announced choir auditions, a small spark lit inside her. Not because she thought she could sing exceptionally well, but because she thought joining the choir might finally give her a place to belong. She imagined sitting with others, laughing softly during rehearsals, perhaps making a friend or two. Even if she didn't talk much, she liked the idea of being part of something bigger than herself. She stared at the audition poster for 3 days before she finally decided. She stood in the hallway, reading the same words over and over. Choir auditions. All students welcome. All students welcome. She repeated the words in her mind. Maybe they really meant it. Maybe someone like her could finally take a small step toward being seen. She signed her name on the sheet with shaky fingers. She almost erased it twice. But for the first time since she joined the school, she refused to let fear make the decisions for her. The day of the audition approached faster than she expected. She spent evenings standing in front of the mirror, trying to practice simple vocal warm-ups she found online. She was not terrible, but she was not amazing either. Her voice was soft and breathy, and nerves often made it sound unstable. Still, she believed that effort should count for something. On the morning of the audition, she woke up earlier than usual. She wore a clean uniform, tied her hair neatly, and carried a small bottle of water. As she walked to school, she kept whispering to herself to stay calm. She tried to remind herself that even if she failed, at least she had tried. That alone made her stronger than she was before. But the moment she entered the music hall and saw the number of students waiting, her confidence crumbled almost instantly. Groups were gathered in corners, chatting excitedly, warming up their voices together, some practicing short melodies confidently. She watched them and felt her throat tighten. They looked so sure of themselves. They looked like they belonged. She sat alone on a bench near the wall, waiting for her turn. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if the others could hear it too. She tried to breathe slowly, but it didn't help much. She wished she could disappear, but the thought of walking out felt even worse. Leaving would mean giving up on herself again, and she didn't want to do that anymore. At the front of the room stood the choir director, a tall man with sharp eyes who carried himself as if every sound in the room should bend to his command. He didn't smile. He didn't look welcoming. Instead, he kept tapping his foot impatiently, as if annoyed by the entire process. The moment she saw him, Eliza felt her courage leak out of her like air from a balloon. Students went in one by one. Some walked out smiling, others disappointed, a few near tears. When the director finally called her name, her legs felt weak. She walked to the front slowly, almost wishing someone else would go instead. She stood facing him, hands clasped tightly. "Well?" the director said sharply. "State your piece. Begin." Eliza opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, clearing her throat quietly, then tried again. She chose a simple song, one she had practiced dozens of times. But the moment she sang the first line, her voice cracked. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. She tried again, pushing through the nerves, but every note felt wrong, small, shaky. The director raised his eyebrows, unimpressed. She saw a couple of students in the back trying not to laugh. That made her even more nervous. Her voice trembled more. Her breath shook. She could feel herself losing control of the song she once practiced with confidence at home. The room felt hotter. Her vision blurred for a moment. She wanted to disappear. By the time she finished, a painfully long silence followed. The director sighed loudly, rubbing his forehead as if her performance had given him a headache. "That," he said, "was weak." Eliza's stomach dropped. "You have no projection, no confidence, and no vocal control," he continued. His tone was harsh, almost mocking. "Why would you audition if you clearly aren't ready? This is a choir, not a place for whispering." A few students snickered under their breath. Eliza felt her heart sink deeper. She stared at the floor, unable to look up. The director waved his hand toward the door. "Thank you. That will be all." She nodded quietly, feeling her throat tighten again. She walked out without meeting anyone's eyes, but she heard whispers behind her. Some were pitying. Some were amused. All of them stung. Outside the music hall, she leaned against the wall and took a shaky breath. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt before. She told herself she shouldn't cry, not here, not where others could see. But the pain pressed heavily on her chest. She had hoped this would be her chance to belong. Instead, she felt more alone than ever. She sat on a bench under a tree for several minutes before she could gather her thoughts. She felt foolish for believing she could stand among confident singers when she could barely speak loudly in a room full of people. She wanted to forget the audition entirely, erase it from her mind, pretend she had never signed up. She wanted to go home, sit at her piano, and let the music swallow her sadness. But even in that moment of disappointment, she didn't realize one thing. This failure would soon lead her to something much bigger, something more meaningful than she ever expected. And though she couldn't see it yet, her journey had only just begun. The bell rang loudly through the hallways, but Eliza barely heard it. She walked slowly, keeping her eyes down, wishing she could turn herself invisible. Students rushed past her, chatting, laughing, but she moved like a shadow among them. Every sound around her felt distant, like she was underwater. Her mind kept replaying the choir director's voice, sharp and disappointed. She tried to push the memory away, but it clung to her thoughts like a heavy cloud. Her classroom felt no different. She sat quietly at her desk, pretending to focus on her notebook. But her mind wasn't on the lesson. It was still inside the music room, still hearing the faint laughter that followed her as she walked out after the audition. She wondered if the students were still talking about her. She wondered if they were telling others about how badly she sang. She imagined whispers following her in the hallways, and the thought made her feel even smaller. During lunchtime, she didn't go to the cafeteria. She walked outside instead, choosing a quiet corner near the side of the building where she usually ate alone. She sat on the cold cement, took out her lunch, and stared at it without much interest. Food felt like the last thing she wanted. Her stomach felt too tight from nerves, embarrassment, and the weight of her thoughts. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter. It was just one audition. People failed all the time. But deep down, it mattered because she had hoped it would help her fit in. She had imagined something different, something better. She had hoped someone might look at her and see a person worth knowing. But now, she felt like she had proven exactly what everyone already thought, that she was too quiet, too unsure, too ordinary to stand out. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of laughter from the courtyard. Eliza listened to it and wondered what it must feel like to be part of a group, to belong somewhere, to be accepted without having to prove anything. The thought made her chest ache a little. When classes ended for the day, she waited until most of the students had already left. She took her time packing her bag, hoping that if she moved slowly enough, she wouldn't have to pass by anyone who had seen her audition. She didn't want to meet any eyes or hear anything that might remind her of what happened. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed the music room door standing slightly open. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep walking, pretending she didn't see it. But another part of her, much smaller but more stubborn, pulled her closer. She peeked inside. The room was empty. The lights were still on, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor. The chairs were neatly lined up, and the piano sat quietly in the corner. The same piano she had seen during the audition. The same one she was too scared to touch earlier. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then slowly she stepped inside. The air in the room felt different when she was alone. Without the pressure of eyes watching her, her breath came easier. The silence was gentle, almost comforting. She walked toward the piano and stood beside it, afraid to sit down but unable to leave. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the piano. The smooth surface reminded her of her mother's instrument at home. How many nights had she spent playing softly after finishing her homework? How many times had she pressed the keys just to let her feelings out when words felt too heavy? She pulled out the bench, sat down quietly, and rested her hands on the keys. For a moment she didn't move. She simply closed her eyes and let her thoughts settle like dust falling to the floor. Then, without planning the melody, she began to play. It started softly, almost like a whisper. Simple notes, gentle and slow, rising and falling like a calm breath. But as her fingers warmed up, the sound grew clearer. The melody carried her sadness, her frustration, and the small hope she still held on to. It wasn't a song she practiced. It wasn't something she memorized. It was something she felt, something she needed to let out. As she played, the tension she'd been holding inside began to fade. The disappointment from earlier softened like melting ice. Her hands moved as if guided by memory and emotion, expressing everything she couldn't say aloud. For the first time that day, she felt like herself again. She didn't know how long she had been playing. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her until a faint sound interrupted the flow of her music. A quiet gasp, barely audible. Eliza froze mid-note. Her heart jumped. She turned sharply, breath caught in her throat. Standing near the doorway was the school janitor, an older man who usually kept to himself. He held a mop in one hand and looked at her with wide, gentle eyes. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem annoyed that she was in the music room without permission. If anything, he looked surprised, pleasantly surprised. "That was something," he said softly. Eliza's face warmed instantly. She stood up quickly, stepping away from the piano as if she had done something wrong. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I'll leave." "Wait," he said, raising a hand slowly. "You play very beautifully." She blinked, stunned. No one had ever said that to her before. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop," he added with a small smile. "I was walking by when I heard the music. I thought it was the radio at first. But then I realized it was you." Eliza lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Compliments always felt too big for her to hold. "You shouldn't hide something like that," he said kindly. "Not many people can play with that kind of feeling." She didn't know what to say. Words felt stuck in her throat. She wanted to tell him that she hadn't meant to play loudly. She wanted to explain that she only felt brave when no one else was around. But nothing came out. The janitor didn't push her to speak. He simply nodded as if he understood. "Don't worry," he said gently. "I won't tell anyone you were here, but you should keep playing. You have something special." Eliza nodded once, her heart beating fast. Not from fear this time, but from something new. Something warm. She had never thought her piano playing was special. It was just something she did to survive her quiet life. Something that helped her feel connected to her mother. She never imagined anyone else would think it mattered. After the janitor left, she stood in the center of the music room, unsure of what to do next. She looked at the piano again. A strange thought crossed her mind. Maybe she wasn't completely talentless. Maybe singing wasn't her strength, but the piano had always felt like a part of her. As she reached out and closed the piano lid gently, she still doubted herself. But for the first time since the audition, she didn't feel completely defeated. She left the music room quietly, walking down the empty hallway with a softer pace. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a tiny spark of hope. That night at home, she sat at her mother's piano longer than usual. She played until her fingers were tired and her eyes were heavy. Each note made her feel a little bit stronger. Each melody reminded her that her value wasn't defined by one bad moment or one unkind person. She wasn't perfect, but she wasn't hopeless either. She didn't know yet that more people would soon discover her hidden talent. She didn't know that this small moment in the music room would lead to something much larger. Something that would change her life at school and the way others saw her. For now, she simply closed her eyes and let the music carry her, unaware that everything was beginning to shift around her. The next morning, Eliza walked to school feeling a little different. The sadness from the choir audition still lingered somewhere inside her, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. The memory of the janitor's words stayed with her. Every time she thought of them, it felt like someone had placed a small light inside her chest. She wasn't used to people noticing her, let alone saying something kind about her. The simple compliment replayed in her mind, softening her steps as she walked. Still, she kept her eyes down when she entered the building. She didn't want to draw attention to herself. She didn't want anyone asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. But she also didn't feel as invisible as before. Something had shifted, even if she couldn't fully explain it. Her classes went by as usual. She took notes quietly, listened carefully, and avoided the noisier groups. She didn't talk much, but that wasn't new. What was new was the small feeling of comfort she carried inside her, knowing that someone, even if just one person, had heard her play and thought she was good. During lunch, she sat outside again, choosing the same quiet corner near the side of the building. She liked the sound of the leaves rustling above her. It reminded her of the calmness she felt when she played the piano. She ate slowly, thinking about the melodies she wanted to practice when she went home. For the first time in weeks, she found herself humming softly under her breath. As the day went on, she didn't think much about the music room. She wasn't planning to go back. She knew she wasn't supposed to be in there without permission. The only reason she stayed after school the previous day was because she felt so overwhelmed and needed a place to breathe. She didn't expect to return. But when classes ended, her feet carried her there almost without her realizing it. She found herself standing in front of the music room again. The door was closed this time, but she could hear faint music coming from inside. It wasn't singing. It was just someone playing scales on the piano, slow and steady. The sound made her feel nervous, like she was intruding. She almost walked away, but something made her stay. She waited quietly in the hallway until the playing stopped. A moment later, the door opened and a student she had seen before walked out holding sheet music. The student seemed in a hurry and didn't notice Eliza standing there. When the hallway grew quiet again, she looked at the door and took a deep breath. She didn't plan to go inside. She only wanted to peek through the window to see if the room was empty. But the moment she pressed her hand against the door, it opened slightly. The room was empty. She hesitated again. She knew she shouldn't go in. But the piano seemed to call her in the same soft way it always did. It felt like a safe place. A place where her voice didn't matter, where no one laughed at her, where she could express herself without fear. She stepped inside quietly and closed the door behind her. The piano sat in the same corner, lights reflecting off its dark wooden surface. She walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a friend she hadn't seen in a long time. She sat on the bench and rested her hands on the keys. Before she started playing, she looked around again to make sure no one was watching. Then she began. Her fingers moved with ease, creating a melody that felt soft but full of emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The notes blended together, filling the room with a gentle warmth. She closed her eyes, letting the music carry her thoughts away from the embarrassment of the audition and toward the comfort she found within the piano. What she didn't know was that someone else was listening. Not from the hallway this time, but from outside the window. Two students were passing by on their way home when they heard the sound. They stopped walking and looked toward the building, confused at first. They couldn't see inside because of the sunlight reflecting on the glass, but they could hear every note clearly. One of them whispered something to the other, and they both leaned in closer. "Who's playing?" One of them whispered. "I don't know," the other replied. "But it sounds really good." Neither of them recognized the melody, but it didn't matter. The emotion behind the music made them stand still, as if they were afraid to move and break the moment. Inside the room, Eliza continued playing, unaware of her small audience outside. She drifted from one melody to another, playing songs she remembered from childhood, then creating small ones of her own in between. The music flowed naturally, almost effortlessly, like her hands knew what her heart was feeling before she did. When she finished, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment. She didn't want the feeling to end. For the first time that day, she felt peaceful. She packed her things quietly and prepared to leave. Before she reached the door, she looked back at the piano one more time. She didn't know why, but something about the room made her feel safe. She hoped she could return again, even if it was only for a few minutes. When she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, she didn't notice the two students quickly stepping back from the window outside. They watched her walk away, their curiosity growing even more. "That was her?" one asked softly. "I think so," the other replied. "She's in our class, right?" "Yeah. But I didn't know she could play like that." "Neither did I." They watched her disappear down the walkway. Neither of them laughed or said anything rude. Instead, they exchanged thoughtful looks. The next day at school, something felt odd to Eliza. Students didn't treat her differently, but she noticed small things she hadn't before. A couple of people seemed to glance at her longer than usual in the hallway. Someone looked like they wanted to approach her, but changed their mind at the last second. Another student from her math class smiled at her when she walked in, something that had never happened before. Eliza didn't understand why. She wasn't used to being noticed, and the attention made her feel nervous. She wondered if it had something to do with the choir audition, but that didn't make sense. No one would smile at her because of that. During lunch, she returned to her usual spot. As she sat down, she overheard two students walking by. "I'm telling you, someone was playing the piano yesterday," one said. "Yeah, I heard. I wonder who it was." She froze, unable to move her fork. Her heart thumped once, then again, faster this time. Were they talking about her? She didn't know what to do with the thought. It scared her a little, but it also made her feel something else. Something warm and unfamiliar. She finished her lunch quietly and tried not to look around too much. When classes ended again, she didn't go to the music room right away. She walked slowly, unsure whether she should go back. She didn't want to attract attention. She didn't want to get in trouble. But the pull toward the piano was stronger than her fear. When she reached the room, she saw the door open and the choir director standing inside. She froze instantly. He looked frustrated, flipping through sheet music with an impatient sigh. Clearly, he hadn't seen her yet. She slowly stepped back, hoping to leave without being noticed. But the floor creaked under her shoe. The director turned. For a moment, she expected him to scold her or say something sharp, just like he did during the audition. Her breath caught. Instead, he simply said, "Do you need something?" She shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered. She turned to leave, but he spoke again, stopping her. "If you want to practice, come after I'm done," he said. His voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was neutral, something she didn't expect from him. She nodded slowly and walked away, confusion swirling inside her. She didn't know that the director had heard rumors too. He didn't know who was playing the piano after school, but he had received several comments from teachers and even a parent saying someone had been sounding surprisingly talented in the music room the day before. He didn't know it was her. Not yet. And he had no idea how much that hidden talent would soon change everything he thought he knew about her. Eliza walked home that afternoon feeling more confused than anything. The choir director's words played repeatedly in her mind. He hadn't been kind, but he also hadn't been rude. His tone was plain, almost tired, but not sharp like before. She didn't know what to make of it. Why would he offer her a chance to practice after he finished? Especially when he had made it clear during auditions that he thought she didn't belong in music. She held her bag tighter as she walked. Maybe he didn't recognize her. Maybe he thought she was someone else. Or maybe he didn't care who used the piano as long as it kept students focused on something productive. She tried not to think about it too much, but her mind kept returning to the moment he turned toward her and didn't send her away. By the time she reached home, she still didn't have a clear answer. She placed her bag on the chair, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat at her mother's piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she didn't start immediately. She kept thinking about the music room, the students who had overheard her, the janitor's compliment, and now the choir director's unexpected reaction. She finally began to play, hoping the music would help untangle her thoughts. Soft melodies filled the room, and slowly, her mind relaxed. She played until the sky grew darker outside her window, then closed the piano gently. She went to bed early, but sleep didn't come right away. Her mind was full of questions she didn't yet understand. The next day at school, nothing seemed different on the surface. Students rushed through the hallways as usual. Teachers carried stacks of papers. Groups gathered near lockers, laughing and talking loudly. But underneath the normal noises, something small but noticeable had changed. More people were looking at her. Not in a rude way. Not in the way people stare when someone trips or spills something. These looks were softer, curious, confused. She caught them when she turned corners or entered classrooms. Students who had never noticed her before now glanced at her like they were trying to figure something out. She kept her eyes low, pretending she didn't see any of it. She didn't want attention. It made her nervous, made her want to shrink into herself. But there was no denying that something was spreading through the school. Rumors whispered in the hallways. Conversations stopped when she walked by. She wasn't sure if she should be afraid or hopeful. During lunch, she stayed in her usual quiet corner, eating slowly. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up, startled. 2 students from her math class walked past her, looking like they were going to say something but changed their minds at the last second. They gave her small, polite nods instead. She didn't know how to respond, so she looked down at her lunch. But inside, a small part of her felt different. Not confident, not comfortable, but something close to being seen. It was unfamiliar and strange, but not entirely unpleasant. After school, she found herself heading toward the music room again, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe she wanted to practice. Maybe she wanted comfort. Maybe she wanted answers. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. As she approached the door, she heard voices inside. The choir director was speaking with one of the teachers. She stopped walking and listened, not intentionally eavesdropping but unable to help hearing. "I need something special for the school event," he said with frustration in his voice. "The choir pieces aren't strong enough this year. We need a standout moment." The teacher responded quietly, but Eliza couldn't hear her exact words. The director sighed loudly. "Yes, I heard the rumors. Someone playing after school. Some student who apparently sounds impressive. But I don't know who it is, and no one will tell me." Eliza quietly stepped back, her heart racing. They were talking about her. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. But she also didn't want to lie. The teacher wished the director good luck and left. A moment later, the room went silent. She took a deep breath and forced herself to move forward, gently knocking on the doorframe. The choir director looked up, surprised. "Oh, you again." He didn't sound annoyed, but he didn't sound excited either. His expression stayed flat. "Are you here to practice?" he asked. She nodded quietly. He glanced at the clock, then leaned back slightly. "Give me 5 minutes. I'm finishing something." She stepped to the side, waiting quietly near the wall. But before he turned back to his papers, he squinted at her. Not in a harsh way, but in a searching way. "You were here yesterday too, weren't you?" She nodded again, unsure what else to say. "And the day before?" Another small nod. He raised an eyebrow, but his tone remained calm. "You come here often?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes." There was a short pause. Then he said, "You like music?" She didn't answer right away. She only lowered her eyes and nodded again. He stared at her for another moment, then returned to his paperwork without saying anything more. But something about the way he looked at her felt different. Not judgmental, not dismissive, more like he was trying to understand something he had previously overlooked. When he left the room, she stepped inside and sat at the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, nervous but eager. Before she started playing, she checked the door to make sure he had truly gone. Then she began. Her fingers moved softly at first, warmed by the familiar feel of the keys. She played the same melody from the day before, the one that came from her heart rather than sheet music. The room filled with gentle notes that grew deeper, richer, more emotional as she played. She didn't think about anything else. The audition, the laughter, the looks in the hallway. The music took over, flowing out of her like a quiet river. She didn't know the director had not actually left the building. He had walked down the hall toward the exit but stopped when he heard the music begin. He paused, surprised. Then he turned around and walked slowly back toward the music room, each step more curious than the last. He peered through the small window in the door, watching her play. His eyes widened. He recognized talent when he saw it. He recognized feeling, expression, natural skill. And what he saw through that window was something he had never expected from the shy girl who had barely gotten through the choir audition. Her posture was calm, but her hands moved with confidence and emotion. She wasn't just repeating notes. She was telling a story without words. He stood there for the entire performance, watching quietly, deeply focused. When she finished, she stayed seated for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then she stood to leave. But when she opened the door, she found the choir director standing right there. She froze instantly. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was calm but serious. "That was you." Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. "You're the one playing after school," he said more softly this time. "The one everyone's been talking about." She lowered her eyes, embarrassed, unsure if she had done something wrong. "You didn't tell me," he said, not accusingly but thoughtfully. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" She swallowed hard. "I didn't know I should." He blinked, taken aback by her honesty. He rubbed his forehead and let out a slow breath. "I misjudged you," he said quietly. "I thought you had no musical strength. But I was wrong." She stared down at her shoes, unsure how to respond. He continued, "The school event is coming up. We need something powerful, something moving, and I think you might be the one who can deliver it." Her eyes lifted slowly, surprise rushing through her chest. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't criticizing. He was offering her something, a chance, place, a moment to be seen. But fear tugged at her heart. She wasn't used to performing. She wasn't used to being watched. She didn't know if she could stand on a stage without her nerves crushing her. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't have to decide now," he replied. "But think about it. What you played just now, students should hear that. People should hear that." She didn't answer, but something inside her quietly shifted again, growing stronger. She walked home that day with her mind full of thoughts she never expected to think. The director believed in her talent. People had heard her music. Students were talking about her, curious, not mocking. And for the first time in her life, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to stay invisible after all. When the choir director walked out of the rehearsal room that afternoon, the entire place felt lighter, as if someone had opened a window and let the tension escape. For the first time, the group felt free to breathe, free to move, free to exist without the constant pressure of being judged for every small mistake. But the biggest change was what happened inside the girl who had been ridiculed for so long. She didn't feel invisible anymore. She didn't feel like someone standing at the back, praying not to be noticed. Instead, she felt like someone who had something worth sharing, something that could fill a room and silence even the harshest critics. After the choir director left, the others gathered around her. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but softly, almost carefully, as if they were afraid of overwhelming her. The older boy from the tenor section stepped forward first and said, "We didn't know you could play like that." His voice was gentle, not shocked or exaggerated, but sincere. Another girl nodded in agreement, adding, "You were holding all of that inside this whole time?" The pianist shyly smiled, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she didn't want anyone to think she had been hiding her talent on purpose. She simply had never thought anyone wanted to hear it. The younger students watched her the way people watch something rare, like a sunrise or a beautiful painting. Some of them whispered, some stayed quiet, but all of them were thinking the same thing. This girl, the one who had been pushed aside again and again, wasn't just good. She was special. As the whispers faded, the choir assistant cleared her throat softly. She had been standing near the door the whole time, processing everything she had seen. She wasn't the kind of person who spoke unless she had something important to say, but now she stepped forward with a mix of calm and purpose. "We need to talk about the concert," she said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. The concert, yes, that was still happening. And now everything had changed. The assistant looked directly at the pianist and asked, "Would you be willing to play the opening piece for the performance?" The room went still as everyone waited for her answer. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had never imagined being part of the concert. She never even thought she would be allowed near the stage. The choir director always made her feel like music was something she had to fight for, something she didn't fully deserve. And now she was being asked to open the show? She hesitated, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the piano as if searching for courage. "Do you really think I should?" she asked softly. The assistant nodded without hesitation. "Not only should you," she replied, "you need to. That performance today, it wasn't just playing notes. It was telling a story, and people need to hear that story." The choir members agreed. Their faces showed a mixture of admiration and hope, and strangely, she felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from hiding, but the kind that comes from finally stepping into something she was meant to do. After a long breath, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly, "I'll do it." When she said those words, the room seemed to brighten. The younger students smiled, and even the older ones looked relieved. It felt like something right had finally happened after so many days of things going wrong. Over the next few days, rehearsals were different, warmer, kinder, more alive. Without the sharp voice of the choir director constantly breaking the focus, everyone felt more at ease. And because they felt safe, they began to work harder and with real passion. Music was no longer something they performed out of fear. It became something they wanted to do, something they enjoyed again. The pianist practiced every day, not because she felt pressured, but because she genuinely loved it. She returned to the old classroom during lunch breaks, early mornings, and quiet evenings when most students had gone home. The piano wasn't perfect, but to her it felt like a friend. A friend who always listened, never judged, and always answered back with warm sound whenever she pressed a key. Sometimes the other students would peek in to watch quietly. They didn't interrupt. They didn't ask for anything. They simply listened. Her music made the room feel safe, like a place where no one had to pretend or hide. One afternoon, the assistant entered while she was practicing. She didn't speak at first. She just sat nearby and listened. When the girl finished, she said softly, "You know, talent like yours comes with responsibility." The pianist blinked, unsure what she meant. The assistant continued, "People are drawn to your playing. They feel something when they hear you. Not everyone can do that. So when you walk onto that stage for the concert, don't think of it as proving something to anyone. Not to the choir director, not to the school, not even to yourself. Think of it as giving people something they didn't know they needed. The girl nodded slowly. She understood. For the first time, she wasn't playing to earn someone's approval. She was playing because her music meant something, because it touched people in ways words couldn't. As the concert day approached, quiet excitement spread through the school. Students whispered in hallways, teachers exchanged knowing looks, and even people who didn't know much about the situation somehow felt there was something special coming. There was a buzz around the choir, but the pianist didn't let it distract her. She stayed focused, steady, and calm. Her mind wasn't on the pressure. It was on the music. The night before the concert, she couldn't sleep. Not because she was scared, this feeling was different. She lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. The moments she felt ignored, the days she doubted herself, the painful rehearsals where she felt small, and the single moment when everything changed with just one piece of music. All those memories didn't hurt anymore. Instead, they felt like steps. Difficult steps, yes, but steps that brought her to where she was now. Early the next morning, before anyone else arrived, she walked into the music hall. The stage was empty, lit only by the dim lights along the aisles. The piano sat at the front, waiting. She approached it slowly. She placed her hand on the polished surface and smiled a little. Something inside her whispered, "You belong here." She sat down and played softly, just a few notes, nothing more. The sound echoed gently in the empty hall, felt warm like a greeting. Then she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I will give them everything I have." As she stood to leave, she heard footsteps. The choir director entered from the back door. She froze, wondering how he would react. He looked tired, but his expression wasn't the same as before. Something in him seemed changed. Maybe softened, maybe aware, maybe even sorry, though he didn't say anything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't criticize her. He simply walked past her, nodding slightly as if acknowledging her presence. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an insult either. It was something in between. She didn't need his approval anymore, and that realization filled her with unexpected strength. That evening, the students gathered for one final rehearsal. The assistant gave the group encouraging words, reminding them they had worked hard and deserved to feel proud. The pianist watched everyone warm up, feeling grateful, not just for the chance to perform, but for the journey that had brought them all together. As the rehearsal ended, the assistant approached her one last time. "Are you ready?" she asked. The pianist smiled, her eyes calm and steady. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty. "I'm ready." She wasn't just talking about the concert anymore. She was talking about stepping into her real self, confident, brave, and unafraid to be seen. And the next day, the world would finally hear her. The day of the concert arrived with a kind of calm that felt almost magical. The sky was clear, the air was cool, and everything around the school seemed strangely still, as if the whole world knew something important was about to happen. Students walked around with nervous smiles, teachers hurried through the halls carrying papers and clipboards, and parents began gathering outside, waiting to enter the auditorium. Inside, the lights were warm and soft, the stage decorated simply but beautifully, with the piano sitting quietly at the center, waiting for the girl who would soon bring it to life. Backstage, the choir members were busy adjusting their outfits, fixing hair, straightening collars, and whispering to each other about how excited or nervous they felt. But the girl who would open the concert sat alone on a small bench near the side curtain. She didn't look frightened. She looked thoughtful, calm, and ready. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds around her fade away. She could hear muffled voices from the audience, the rustling of programs, the occasional cough or laugh, the low hum of anticipation. She imagined all those people sitting in their seats, completely unaware that someone they barely noticed before was about to step into the light and show them something unforgettable. The assistant entered quietly and walked over to her. "You're doing great," she whispered. Even though the girl hadn't played a single note yet, the assistant could see the calm strength in her eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "When you go out there," she said softly, Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about the choir director. Just think about the music. Let it tell its story. The girl nodded slowly. She wasn't thinking about proving anything anymore. She wasn't thinking about the times she felt ignored or the moments when her confidence was crushed. She was thinking about that warm feeling she had when her fingers touched the keys. She was thinking about how music made her feel safe and alive. That was enough. A few minutes later, the auditorium lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the show. A hush spread through the room as the announcer stepped onto the stage. He welcomed the audience, said a few kind words about the students' hard work, and then introduced the opening performance. To begin tonight's concert, he said, we have a beautiful piano piece performed by a student whose talent speaks louder than any introduction I could give. Backstage, she felt her heart beat softly, steady, not panicked. She stood up slowly, smoothed her clothes, and walked toward the stage entrance. As the curtains parted for her, she took a careful breath and stepped into the warm glow of the lights. The audience watched as she walked toward the piano. Some recognized her, others didn't. A few whispered quietly, wondering why someone so quiet and unknown was opening the concert. She didn't pay attention to any of it. She approached the piano, pulled out the bench gently, and sat down. For a brief moment, she rested her hands on her lap, allowing herself to feel the weight of the moment. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, soft but clear, like a gentle ripple across still water. The audience fell completely silent. Then the next notes followed, flowing into each other like a story unfolding one sentence at a time. Her hands moved gracefully, not hurried or tense, but smooth and certain. Every note had meaning. Every phrase seemed to breathe. People leaned forward without realizing it. Parents who were checking their programs lowered them. Students who were whispering stopped mid-sentence. Teachers who were thinking about their schedules forgot everything else. Even the choir director, sitting stiffly in a row near the aisle, seemed caught off guard. His expression softened, confused by the beauty of what he was hearing. Her music filled the room like warm light. It wasn't just skillful. It was emotional, deep, honest. The kind of playing that came from someone who knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be quiet, to hold dreams in silence. The audience didn't just hear it, they felt it. The melody shifted into a gentle rise, then fell like a sigh. Her fingers glided effortlessly across the keys, telling a story no one had expected from her. To the crowd, it felt like discovering a hidden treasure that had been sitting right in front of them the whole time. Some people closed their eyes. Some appeared moved. A few even wiped away tears, surprised by their own emotions. No one coughed. No one whispered. The room was filled with the kind of silence that only happens when everyone is completely captivated. Backstage, the choir members watched through the small gap in the curtain. They looked different than before, prouder, more connected. Some smiled softly. Others watched with wide eyes, still amazed by the transformation they had witnessed. This wasn't just a performance. It was a moment that belonged to all of them, because they had seen her journey from the beginning. When the final part of the piece arrived, she played it with a softness that felt like the closing of a storybook, the kind that leaves a warm feeling long after the last page is turned. And then, with a gentle touch, she played the final note. It lingered in the room like a breath held at the end of a dream. And when it faded, the audience remained still for a second, almost as if they didn't want the moment to end. Then the applause came. It started small, almost hesitant, as though the audience was afraid to break the spell. But within seconds, it grew loud, rising like a wave that filled the entire hall. People stood. They clapped with excitement, admiration, and genuine emotion. Some cheered. Others looked around in disbelief, wondering how they hadn't noticed her before. The girl blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected this. She had hoped to play well, hoped not to disappoint anyone, but she had not imagined the entire room rising to their feet. She stood slowly, bowed politely, and felt something warm bloom inside her. A mix of joy, relief, and something she had never allowed herself to feel before, pride. As she stepped off the stage, the choir members greeted her with open arms. "You were amazing. I can't believe that was you. You set the bar for all of us tonight." They weren't saying these things out of politeness. They meant every word. The assistant hugged her gently, whispering, "I knew you had this in you." The girl smiled with quiet gratitude. Then the choir director approached. He didn't look angry. He didn't look harsh. He looked thoughtful, older somehow. He took a moment before speaking. "Your performance was—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "Unexpected," he finally said. "Not dramatic, not emotional, but it was sincere." His tone carried something she had never heard from him before, humility. She didn't need his apology, but she accepted the moment for what it was, a sign that he finally saw her. As the concert continued, the choir sang beautifully, energized by her opening performance. Their harmonies felt stronger, their confidence higher. The audience enjoyed every piece, but the opening piano performance remained the highlight of the night. People whispered about it long after the show ended. Some parents asked who she was. Others complimented the assistant for giving her the opportunity. Teachers smiled proudly, knowing they had witnessed something special. When the night finally ended and the auditorium began to empty, the girl walked onto the stage one last time to gather her music sheets. She looked around the empty hall, remembering how she had once felt too small to belong there. Now she felt different. She felt like she had stepped into the light and realized it didn't burn. It welcomed her. As she touched the piano gently, she whispered, "Thank you." It was her way of showing gratitude to the instrument that helped her speak when words were too small. Outside, the air was cool and refreshing. The moon shone brightly above the school, almost as if celebrating her moment with her. Students and parents walked past, still buzzing with excitement, still talking about the girl who played the piano like she was born for it. As she walked home, she didn't feel alone. She felt understood, seen, heard. Her journey hadn't been easy. She had faced doubt, criticism, and moments that made her feel small. But she had also found her strength, her voice, and her courage. And now, her music wasn't just something she practiced in empty rooms. It was something that touched people's hearts. That night, she realized something important. Sometimes, the people who stand quietly in the back have the loudest stories inside them. And when they finally share those stories, the world goes silent, because it knows it is listening to.